The papers were already on the table when Alina Whitmore walked into the room, and her hands were shaking before she even read a single word. "Sign it," her father said. His voice was low, tired, and afraid. "If you do not sign it tonight, the men outside will take everything. The house, the land, even your mother's ring. We have nothing left, Alina, nothing." Alina looked at the man sitting across the table. He did not stand when she entered. He did not smile. He simply watched her with sharp gray eyes that seemed to measure her worth like a merchant measuring cloth. Duke Alaric Sterling was 40 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in black from collar to boot. His face was carved from stone, calm and unreadable, the face of a man who had stopped feeling things a long time ago. "You understand the terms," he said. His voice was deep and flat without warmth. "You will marry me within the week. You will live in my house, attend events at my side, and behave as a duchess should. In return, your father's debts will vanish, and your family will never be touched by his creditors again." "And if I say no?" Alina asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then your father goes to prison for fraud he did not commit. Your younger sister loses the only school that will take her, and your mother's medical care ends this month," Alaric said, without a trace of cruelty in his tone, which somehow made it worse. "I am not asking you to love me, Miss Whitmore. I am asking you to sign a contract." Alina's chest tightened. She looked at her father, whose eyes were wet with shame, and at her mother standing in the doorway, too weak to walk further into the room. She thought of her sister Julia, only 16, dreaming of becoming a doctor one day. She thought of everything she would lose if she refused, and everything her family would lose if she hesitated even a moment longer. She picked up the pen. Her hand trembled as she signed her name beside his, and the moment the ink dried, something in the room changed. Her father exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for months. Her mother wept quietly with relief. But Alina felt nothing but a cold weight settling into her stomach, the weight of a life she had not chosen, sealed with a signature she could never take back. Alaric stood, buttoned his coat, and looked at her one final time before leaving. "The wedding will be small, private. I do not enjoy spectacles," he said. "A car will come for you Thursday morning. Bring only what you need, everything else will be provided." He left without another word, without a handshake, without even a nod of comfort. The door closed behind him, and Alina stood frozen in the middle of the room, staring at the paper that had just rewritten her entire future. That night she could not sleep. She sat by her window, looking out at the quiet street, thinking about the man she was about to marry. The town spoke of him in whispers. Some said he had once been kind, warm even, before tragedy hollowed him out. Others said he had always been cold, that ice ran through his veins instead of blood. No one seemed to agree on who he truly was, only that he was untouchable, unreachable, and utterly alone despite his wealth and power. Alina did not know which version of him was true. She only knew that in 4 days she would become his wife, bound to a stranger twice her age, a man who looked at her like a business arrangement rather than a person. Thursday morning came faster than she wanted. The black car arrived exactly on time, driven by a quiet man who did not speak beyond a polite greeting. Alina said goodbye to her mother, who held her tightly and whispered that she was proud of her. She hugged Julia, who cried into her shoulder and made her promise to write letters. Her father could not look her in the eye, guilt written across every line of his face, but Alina squeezed his hand gently before stepping into the car. "It's all right, Papa," she said softly. "I chose this. No one forced me." It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that made the truth easier to carry. The drive to the Sterling estate took nearly 2 hours, winding through hills and past gates that grew taller and more guarded the closer they came. When the car finally stopped, Alina stepped out and found herself standing before a mansion so large it seemed to swallow the sky. Stone towers rose on either side, ivy climbed the walls in careful patterns, and dozens of windows stared down at her like watching eyes. A woman in a neat gray dress stepped forward to greet her. "Miss Whitmore, welcome. I am Mrs. Bell, the head housekeeper. The Duke asked me to show you to your rooms." "Is he here?" Alina asked, glancing toward the towering front doors. "He is in his study, miss. He asked not to be disturbed until the ceremony," Mrs. Bell replied, her tone careful, practiced, the tone of someone used to protecting her employer's privacy. Alina nodded and followed her inside. The interior of the mansion was just as grand as the outside, filled with polished floors, tall paintings, and a silence so heavy it pressed against her ears. There were no sounds of laughter, no music, nothing that suggested life happened here in any joyful way. It felt more like a museum than a home. Her room was beautiful beyond anything she had ever seen, with a canopy bed, tall windows overlooking a garden, and a wardrobe already filled with new clothes in her exact size. Yet none of it felt like comfort. It felt like preparation, like she was being dressed for a role rather than welcomed into a family. The wedding took place that same afternoon in a small private chapel on the estate grounds. There were no guests beyond a handful of staff members and a quiet officiant who read the vows in a hurried, businesslike manner. Alaric stood beside her in a black suit, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed somewhere past her shoulder rather than on her face. When it came time to say her vows, Alina's voice shook, but she forced the words out, promising to honor a man she barely knew. When Alaric spoke his vows, his voice was steady, calm, almost bored, as though he had recited the same words 100 times before in his mind and felt nothing when saying them aloud. There was no kiss at the end of the ceremony, only a brief, formal nod between them, as if sealing a business deal rather than beginning a marriage. "Congratulations," Alaric said afterward, his tone flat. "You are now the Duchess of Stirling. Mrs. Bell will explain your new responsibilities. I have matters to attend to." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Alina standing alone in her wedding dress in the middle of an empty chapel, married to a man who had not looked at her with anything resembling warmth even once. That night, alone in her new room, Alina finally allowed herself to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears that slid down her cheeks as she stared at the unfamiliar ceiling above her. She thought of her family, safe now because of the sacrifice she had made. She thought of the cold man she had married, a man who seemed more like a shadow than a person. And she thought of the years ahead of her, uncertain and unknown, stretching out like a road she could not see the end of. She did not know, as she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, that the man she had married was standing in his study at that very moment, staring at a photograph he kept locked in his desk drawer, his jaw tight, his eyes distant, carrying pain of his own that no one in that house had ever been allowed to see. Alina Whitmore had entered a world of wealth and silence, married to a man everyone called cold, heartless, and unreachable. But she did not yet know that beneath that frozen exterior was a heart that had once loved deeply and lost everything because of it, a heart that had built walls so high that even its owner had forgotten what warmth felt like. Her new life had only just begun, and though it started in silence and sorrow, it was a life that would soon change in ways neither of them could have ever imagined. Morning came with a soft knock on her door. A young maid named Alice entered carrying a tray of tea and fresh bread, her smile the first genuine warmth Alina had encountered since arriving. "Good morning, my lady," Alice said cheerfully. "The Duke has already left for his morning meeting in the city. He asked that I show you the house and gardens today if you wish." Alina sat up, surprised. "He arranged that for me." "Yes, my lady. He said you should not feel like a stranger in your own home," Alice replied, though she seemed just as puzzled by the gesture as Alina was. It was such a small thing, a simple instruction passed through a maid, yet it planted a strange seed of curiosity in Alina's mind. The man who had married her without warmth, who had walked away from their wedding without a second glance, had still thought to ensure she was not left alone and lost in his enormous, silent house. Perhaps, Alina thought as she sipped her tea and looked out at the misty morning gardens, there was more to Duke Alaric Stirling than the cold mask he wore so carefully. Perhaps somewhere beneath that ice, there was still a man capable of noticing another person's loneliness, even if he was too guarded to admit it. She did not know yet how right she was. nor how long and difficult the road would be before that man allowed himself to feel anything at all. But as she rose from her bed and dressed for her first full day in her new life, something inside her, some small and stubborn spark, refused to give up hope entirely. Whatever waited for her in the halls of Sterling Manor, Alina decided she would not simply survive it. She would face it with her head held high, just as she had promised her family she would. The house was even larger than Alina had imagined, and Alice walked her through hallway after hallway, pointing out rooms that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. There was a library filled with books so old their spines had faded, a music room with a piano no one seemed to play, and a long gallery of portraits showing generations of Sterling ancestors, all with the same sharp eyes and unsmiling faces. "Does anyone actually live in half of these rooms?" Alina asked, half joking, though the question felt serious the moment she said it. Alice's smile faltered slightly. "Not really, my lady. The Duke mostly stays in his study or his private wing. It has been quiet here for a long time." "How long?" Alina asked gently. "Since before I started working here, my lady. Almost 7 years, I believe," Alice said, then quickly changed the subject, as though she had already said more than she was supposed to. Alina did not push further, but the number stayed with her. 7 years of silence in a house built for laughter and gatherings. 7 years of a man locking himself away from whatever life used to look like before whatever had happened to him. They reached the gardens next, and here, finally, Alina felt something close to peace. Rows of roses bloomed in careful lines, a small stone fountain trickled quietly in the center, and the air smelled of fresh grass and morning rain. It was the first place in the entire estate that did not feel cold. "This is beautiful," Alina said, running her fingers along the edge of a blooming rose bush. "The Duke had this garden built years ago," Alice said. "He used to walk here every evening, they say. He does not come anymore." Alina looked around at the perfectly maintained flowers, clearly still cared for despite their owner's absence, and wondered what kind of man built something so lovely and then abandoned it entirely. Was he punishing himself for something? Or simply too broken to remember why he had built it in the first place? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the gravel path. She turned to see Alaric approaching, still dressed in his formal suit from earlier, his expression as unreadable as ever. Alice quickly excused herself with a small curtsy, leaving Alina alone with her husband for the first time since their brief wedding. "You are exploring," Alaric said, his tone neither warm nor cold, simply observing a fact. "Alice showed me around. I hope that is all right," Alina replied carefully. "It is your home now. You may go wherever you wish except my private study. I ask that you respect that boundary," he said. "I will," Alina said, then gathering her courage, she added, "This garden is lovely." "Alice said you built it." Something flickered across Alaric's face, quick and gone before Alina could fully read it. "That was a long time ago," he said simply, his jaw tightening slightly. "I have a dinner engagement tonight in the city. You are expected to attend as my wife. A car will take you to be fitted for appropriate attire this afternoon." "Of course," Alina said, though she felt a small sting at how quickly he had shifted the conversation, closing the door on any further questions about his past. The dinner that evening was Alina's first real test as Duchess Sterling. The event was hosted by one of Alaric's business associates, a wealthy man named Charles Whitfield, and the room was filled with nobility, businessmen, and their carefully polished wives. Alina wore an elegant deep blue gown chosen for her, and though she felt like an imposter among people who had grown up in such circles, she held her chin high, remembering her promise to face this new life with strength. Alaric barely spoke to her throughout the evening, introducing her only when necessary, his hand resting formally at the small of her back as though guiding a business partner rather than a wife. Alina noticed the whispers immediately, the sideways glances from other women, the poorly hidden curiosity about the young woman who had somehow become the wife of the notoriously untouchable Duke Sterling. "So you are the girl who tamed the Ice Duke," a sharp voice said from beside her. Alina turned to find a beautiful woman with dark hair and a knowing smile, holding a glass of wine with practiced elegance. "I am Victoria Ashford. Alaric and I go back many years." "It is nice to meet you," Alina said politely, though something about the way Victoria said Alaric's first name, so familiar, so intimate, made her stomach tighten uncomfortably. "Do not worry, dear," Victoria said with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Alaric does not open his heart easily. I doubt even marriage will change that, but you seem sweet enough. Perhaps you will last longer than the others." "The others?" Alina asked before she could stop herself. Victoria's smile widened slightly. "Oh, has he not told you about his past? How curious. Well, I'm sure you will learn eventually. Everyone always does." With that, she walked away, leaving Alina standing there with a growing sense of unease and confusion. Later that night in the car ride home, Alina finally spoke up. "Victoria Ashford mentioned that there were others before me. What did she mean?" Alaric's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on his knee, the only sign that the question had affected him at all. "Victoria enjoys stirring trouble. I would not put much weight on her words," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "That is not an answer," Alina said, surprising herself with her own boldness. Alaric turned his head slightly to look at her, and for a brief moment something almost like respect passed through his gray eyes. "You are right. It is not," he admitted. "But it is the only answer I am prepared to give tonight." Alina did not push further, sensing the conversation had reached its limit, but she filed the moment away carefully. There was a story behind this man's coldness, a story involving pain deep enough to build walls that had stood for 7 long years. She did not know yet if she would ever be allowed to hear it, but something in her had already decided she wanted to understand him, not just endure him. The following days settled into a strange rhythm. Alaric left early each morning for his company, Sterling Enterprises, and returned late each evening, often disappearing straight into his study without so much as a greeting. Alina spent her days exploring the estate, getting to know the staff, and slowly learning the responsibilities expected of a duchess. She visited the kitchens and befriended the cook, an older woman named Margaret who seemed delighted to have someone show genuine interest in her work. She spent afternoons in the library, losing herself in books that had clearly not been touched in years. She also began writing letters home, careful to keep her tone light and reassuring for her mother and Julia, though privately she confided more honest feelings in her journal each night. She wrote about the strange loneliness of living in such a large house, about the mystery of her husband's past, and about the small, unexpected moments that made her wonder if there was a real person hiding beneath his icy exterior. One evening, nearly 2 weeks into her new life, Alina could not sleep and decided to walk through the quiet halls, hoping the movement would tire her enough to finally rest. She passed by Alaric's study, noticing light spilling from beneath the closed door, and paused, curious despite her better judgment. She heard nothing at first, only silence, but then, faintly, she heard the sound of a man's voice, low and strained, speaking words she could not quite make out. It did not sound like a business call. It sounded almost like someone speaking to a memory, a private confession meant for no one else's ears. Alina knew she should walk away, respect the boundary he had asked her to keep, but something about the pain in his muted voice rooted her to the spot. Before she could decide what to do, the door opened suddenly, and Alaric stood there, clearly startled to find her standing in the hallway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Alina could see something raw and unguarded in his expression, quickly replaced by his usual careful mask the instant he registered her presence. "I could not sleep," Alina said quickly, feeling as though she had intruded on something deeply private. "I did not mean to disturb you." "You did not disturb me," Alaric said, though his voice was rougher than usual. He glanced back into his study for a brief second before stepping out and closing the door firmly behind him. "It is late. You should rest." "Are you all right?" Alina asked softly, unable to stop herself. Alaric looked at her for a long moment, an unreadable expression crossing his features, as though he was deciding whether to answer honestly or retreat behind his usual walls. "I am fine," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "Good night, Alina." It was the first time he had used her first name, instead of calling her Miss Whitmore, or simply avoiding addressing her directly at all. The small change did not go unnoticed, and as Alina returned to her room that night, she found herself thinking not about the mystery of what she had overheard, but about the way her name had sounded in his voice, quiet and almost gentle, like something fragile he was still deciding whether to trust. Over the following days, Alina noticed small shifts in Alaric's behavior, so subtle she almost convinced herself she was imagining them. He began arriving home slightly earlier some evenings. He asked Mrs. Bell to ensure Alina's favorite tea was always stocked, something Alina had only mentioned once in passing to Alice. He even joined her for dinner twice that week, though their conversations remained brief and formal, filled more with silence than words. Yet within that silence, something was changing. Alina began to notice the way Alaric's shoulders relaxed slightly when she spoke about lighter topics, how his eyes lingered a moment longer than necessary when she laughed at something Margaret had said in the kitchen, how he seemed, in small and quiet ways, to be paying attention to her existence rather than merely tolerating it. She did not know what any of this meant yet, whether it was the beginning of something real or simply the natural adjustment two strangers made when forced to share a life together. But for the first time since signing that fateful contract, Alina felt a flicker of something other than fear or obligation. She felt curiosity, and beneath that curiosity the smallest, most cautious spark of hope. A month into her marriage, Alina had learned the rhythm of the house well enough to feel less like a stranger, and more like someone slowly finding her place within its walls. She had befriended nearly every member of the staff, from Margaret in the kitchen to old Mr. Foster who tended the stables, and she had begun to understand that behind the coldness of Sterling Manor, there was a quiet loyalty among the people who worked there, a loyalty built not out of fear, but out of genuine respect for the man who employed them. "He is not cruel," Margaret told her one afternoon while kneading dough in the kitchen. "Strict, yes, distant certainly, but cruel never. He pays every one of us fairly, remembers our birthdays without being told, and once paid for my daughter's schooling without ever mentioning it to a soul. I only found out because the school called to thank him directly." Alina listened carefully, storing away each small piece of information like a puzzle she was slowly assembling. The picture forming in her mind did not match the cold, heartless man the town whispered about. It matched someone who had built high walls not because he lacked a heart, but because something had once shattered it so completely that he no longer trusted himself to let anyone close enough to hurt him again. That evening, Alina decided to attend one of the town's charity events on her own initiative. Something Mrs. Bell mentioned was organized annually to support the local children's hospital. She had not been formally invited as the Duchess, but she felt it was time to establish her own presence in the community rather than simply existing as an extension of her husband's name. The event was warm and lively, filled with genuine laughter and the kind of easy conversation Alina had missed since arriving at Sterling Manor. She spoke with local families, admired the children's artwork displayed for auction, and found herself donating a generous sum without a second thought, using funds from the allowance Alaric had arranged for her. It was there that she overheard two women discussing the Duke, their voices lowered but not quiet enough to escape her attention. "They say his brother's death broke something in him," one woman whispered. "He was different before, warmer, almost cheerful if you can believe that of the man now. And his fiancée before that, the one who left him standing at the altar," the other added. "Some say that was the real wound. Losing his brother was grief, but being abandoned like that, publicly, humiliated in front of everyone he knew, that was something else entirely." Alina's heart clenched at the words. A brother's death and a broken engagement, both wounds layered on top of each other, both likely contributing to the fortress he had built around his heart. She did not know the full truth, but the pieces were beginning to form a clearer picture of the man she had married, a man who had lost so much that he had decided the safest choice was to lose nothing else, ever again. When she returned home that night, later than usual, she found Alaric waiting in the main hall, his expression a mixture of concern and something else she could not quite name. "You left without telling anyone where you were going," he said, his voice tighter than usual. "I attended the charity event for the children's hospital," Alina replied calmly, though she was surprised by the edge in his tone. "I did not think I needed permission." "You do not need permission," Alaric said, running a hand through his hair in a rare display of visible frustration. "But this house has enemies, Alina. Business rivals who would love nothing more than to use you against me. I was not trying to control you. I was worried." The admission hung in the air between them, unexpected and raw. Alina had not considered that her husband, so guarded and distant, could feel worry over her safety, let alone admit it aloud. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I should have told someone where I was going. I did not think." Alaric's shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension easing from his frame. "It is all right. I overreacted," he admitted, which was perhaps the most vulnerable thing he had said to her since their wedding day. "How was the event?" "Wonderful, actually," Alina said, a small smile forming despite the earlier tension. "The children had made the most beautiful paintings for the auction. I bought 3 of them. I hope that is all right." "Of course," Alaric said, and then, surprising her further, he added, "Perhaps next year we could attend together." The suggestion hung between them, small but significant, an offer of shared future that neither of them had spoken aloud before. Alina nodded, unable to hide her genuine pleasure at the idea. "I would like that." From that night forward, something between them shifted more noticeably. Alaric began joining her for dinner every evening rather than occasionally, and their conversations, while still measured and careful, grew longer and touched on subjects beyond formalities. He asked about her family, listening intently as she spoke of her mother's illness and her sister's dream of becoming a doctor. In return, though he remained guarded about his past, he began sharing small pieces of himself, mentioning his fondness for old maps, his skill at chess, and his genuine passion for architecture, a passion Alina discovered when she found sketches of buildings hidden in his study. One rainy evening, Alina found Alaric in the library, poring over blueprints spread across a large table. Curiosity drew her closer. "What are you working on?" she asked, peering at the intricate drawings. "A community center," Alaric said, somewhat surprised by his own willingness to share. "For the town near the estate. They lack proper facilities for their children. I have been designing it myself for the past few months." Alina stared at him, genuinely stunned. "You designed this yourself. It is beautiful, Alaric." The use of his first name, spoken with such sincere admiration, seemed to catch him off guard. He glanced up at her, something soft flickering behind his usually guarded eyes. "I studied architecture before I inherited the title," he admitted. "It was something I loved once." "Why did you stop?" Alina asked gently, sensing she was treading near something delicate. Alaric was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the edge of the blueprint absent-mindedly. "Life had other plans for me," he said finally, his voice carrying a weight of unspoken sorrow. "Responsibilities took over. Dreams became luxuries I could no longer afford." "You could build this," Alina said softly. "You still can, it is not too late." Alaric looked at her then, really looked at her, as though seeing her clearly for the first time since their wedding. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "perhaps you are right." That night marked a turning point in their fragile, growing connection. Alina began helping him with the community center project, offering her own thoughts on the design, encouraging him whenever doubt crept into his voice about whether the project was worth the time and expense. Alaric, in turn, began seeking her opinion more often, not just about the building, but about small decisions throughout the house, as though her presence had become something he valued rather than merely tolerated. Weeks passed, and the change in Alaric did not go unnoticed by the staff. Mrs. Bell mentioned quietly to Alina one afternoon that the Duke had not smiled so often in all the years she had worked there. Alice giggled while arranging fresh flowers in Alina's room, whispering that the entire house felt lighter somehow, as though a long winter was finally beginning to thaw. Alina tried not to let herself hope too much, aware that Alaric's walls, though beginning to crack, were far from completely broken. There were still nights when he retreated into his study for hours, emerging with shadows under his eyes and a distance in his gaze that told her old wounds still lingered, unhealed and painful. There were still moments when he pulled back suddenly from warmth, as though frightened by his own willingness to feel something again. But there were also moments, growing more frequent by the week, when Alina caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite name, something between wonder and disbelief, as though he could not quite understand how a woman he had married out of necessity had somehow become someone whose presence he genuinely looked forward to each evening. One such evening, as they sat together in the garden Alaric had once abandoned, now slowly coming back to life under Alina's careful attention, he spoke without prompting, his voice quiet in the fading evening light. "I built this garden for someone once," he admitted, staring at the roses rather than at Alina. "Someone I thought I would spend my life with. When that ended, I could not bear to walk here anymore. Every flower reminded me of a future that never happened." Alina's heart ached for him, though she remained quiet, sensing he needed to speak without interruption. "But lately," Alaric continued, finally turning to look at her, "I find myself wanting to walk here again. With you." He paused, as though the admission cost him something significant. "I do not fully understand why, Alina, but I find that I do not want to fight it anymore." Alina reached out, gently placing her hand over his on the stone bench between them, a small gesture that felt monumental given everything that had led them to this moment. "You do not have to understand it right away," she said softly. "You only have to let yourself feel it, one day at a time." Alaric turned his hand beneath hers, lacing their fingers together for the first time since their wedding day, a simple touch that spoke louder than any words either of them could have offered. They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the garden walls, two people who had begun their marriage as strangers bound by necessity, slowly, carefully, becoming something neither of them had expected to find. The frozen walls around Duke Alaric Sterling's heart had not fully melted, not yet. But for the first time in 7 long years, a crack had formed deep enough to let a little warmth through, and standing beside him in that quiet garden, Alina Whitmore realized she was no longer simply enduring her forced marriage. She was falling in love with the man everyone else believed was incapable of loving anyone at all. A storm rolled through the countryside one night, thunder shaking the windows of Sterling Manor and rain pounding against the ancient stone walls. Alina woke to a loud crash of thunder and, unable to fall back asleep, decided to make her way to the kitchen for a warm drink. As she passed Alaric's study, she noticed the door slightly ajar, light flickering from within, and heard something that stopped her cold. It sounded like quiet, ragged breathing, the kind that came from a person trying desperately not to break down completely. She pushed the door open gently. "Alaric." He was sitting at his desk, a framed photograph clutched tightly in his hands, his usually composed face streaked with unshed tears he was fighting hard to control. He looked up at her, startled, clearly caught in a moment he had spent years hiding from everyone. "I am sorry," Alina said quickly, beginning to step back. "I did not mean to intrude." "Stay," Alaric said, his voice hoarse. It was the first time he had ever asked her to remain rather than dismissing her. Alina stepped inside slowly and closed the door behind her, sensing that whatever was about to happen, he needed privacy for it. "Tonight is the anniversary," he said quietly, setting the photograph down on the desk where Alina could finally see it. It showed a much younger Alaric, perhaps in his late 20s, standing beside a laughing young man who shared his same sharp features but with a brighter, more carefree expression. "My brother Nathaniel, he died 7 years ago tonight." Alina sat down slowly in the chair across from him, giving him space to continue at his own pace. "We were driving home from a business meeting together," Alaric continued, his eyes distant, lost in memory. The roads were icy that night, much like tonight's storm. Another car lost control and struck us. I walked away with barely a scratch. Nathaniel did not survive the crash. "Alaric, I am so sorry," Alina whispered, her heart aching for the pain evident in every word he spoke. "He was supposed to inherit the title," Alaric continued, his voice growing tighter with old, unresolved grief. "He was better suited for it than I ever was, warmer with people, more patient, more forgiving. I was always the serious one, the responsible one, but Nathaniel had the kind of heart that made people feel instantly at ease around him. When he died, I felt as though the wrong brother had survived." "That is not true," Alina said firmly, unable to stay silent while he spoke such painful words about himself. "Perhaps not entirely," Alaric admitted, "but it felt true for a very long time. I inherited a title I never wanted, carrying grief I did not know how to process, and shortly after I was engaged to a woman named Catherine, someone my family had approved of long before Nathaniel's death." Alina's chest tightened, recognizing the name from the whispers she had overheard at the charity event weeks earlier. "I threw myself into the engagement, desperate for something stable, something to hold on to while everything else in my life felt like it was falling apart," Alaric continued. "But 6 months after Nathaniel's death, on the day of our wedding, Catherine did not appear. She sent a letter instead, explaining that she could not marry a man who was, in her exact words, already dead inside." The cruelty of those words hung heavy in the room, and Alina felt genuine anger on his behalf. Anger at a woman who had abandoned a grieving man so publicly and so callously. "After that," Alaric said, his voice hardening slightly, "I decided it was safer to close myself off entirely. Grief had already taken my brother. Humiliation had taken whatever pride I had left. I told myself that, if I never allowed myself to feel deeply again, I could never be hurt so completely again." "And for 7 years, you kept that promise to yourself," Alina said softly, finally understanding the full weight of the walls he had built. "Until you arrived," Alaric said, meeting her eyes directly for the first time since he had begun speaking. "I did not want to marry you, Alina, not out of dislike, but out of fear. I was terrified that letting anyone close again would only lead to more pain, more loss. I convinced myself I could keep this marriage purely practical, distant, safe." "And now?" Alina asked quietly, though she already sensed the answer forming in the vulnerable honesty of his expression. "Now I find that despite every wall I built, despite every promise I made to protect myself, I look forward to seeing you each evening. I find myself thinking of you throughout the day, wondering what you might be doing, hoping you are content in this house that has felt like nothing more than a tomb for 7 years, Alaric admitted, his voice raw with an honesty Alina had never heard from him before. "I do not know how to reconcile that with the fear I still carry, but I find I no longer wish to fight it as fiercely as I once did." Alina reached across the desk and gently took his hand, the same way she had in the garden weeks earlier, offering comfort without demanding anything in return. "Grief does not disappear simply because time passes," she said softly. "But it does not have to control every choice you make either. Your brother would not have wanted you to spend your entire life locked away in fear, would he?" Alaric's throat tightened visibly at the mention of his brother's wishes. "No," he admitted quietly. "Nathaniel always said I worried too much, that I should learn to live more freely. He would likely be furious with me for hiding away for so long." "Then perhaps it is time to start living a little more freely," Alina suggested gently. "Not forgetting him, never forgetting him, but honoring his memory by allowing yourself happiness again." They sat together in comfortable silence for a long while after that, the storm gradually calming outside as their conversation had calmed something deep within Alaric that had remained turbulent for 7 long years. Before Alina finally rose to return to her room, Alaric spoke once more, his voice quiet but sincere. "Thank you for listening, Alina. I have not spoken about Nathaniel or Catherine to anyone in years. It felt easier to carry it alone." "You do not have to carry it alone anymore," Alina said simply, offering him a small, genuine smile before leaving him alone with his thoughts, though considerably lighter than she had found him. In the days that followed, something noticeably deeper had settled between them, a trust built not through grand gestures, but through shared vulnerability during a stormlit night neither of them would soon forget. Alaric began speaking more freely about Nathaniel, sharing fond memories rather than only painful ones, describing childhood adventures and inside jokes that made Alina laugh genuinely for the first time at stories about her husband's past. He also began mentioning Catherine less as a wound and more as a lesson learned, a painful chapter that had taught him, however harshly, the difference between obligation and genuine connection. Alina noticed he no longer flinched when her name arose in conversation, no longer carried the same defensive posture whenever the past was mentioned. The community center project also became a shared passion between them, evolving beyond mere blueprints into an actual construction project Alaric decided to pursue seriously, inspired partly by his renewed connection to architecture and partly by Alina's steady encouragement. He named it, without telling her beforehand, the Nathaniel Sterling Community Center, a tribute to his brother's warmth and generosity that Alaric hoped to honor through the project's completion. When Alina discovered the name on the official building plans, she found Alaric in the garden, watching the sunset with an expression more peaceful than she had ever witnessed on his face. "It is beautiful," she said softly, sitting beside him. "He would be proud of you." "I hope so," Alaric replied, glancing at her with something warm and unguarded in his gray eyes. "I could not have found my way back to this project, or to myself, without you, Alina." The words settled between them like a promise, unspoken but deeply felt, and as the sun disappeared behind the horizon, casting the garden in soft golden light, Alina realized that the cold, distant man she had married out of necessity had truly begun to change, not because she had demanded it of him, but because she had simply given him the space, patience, and genuine care to heal at his own pace. Their marriage, born from a contract signed in desperation, was slowly transforming into something far more precious than either of them had dared to imagine possible, a partnership built on shared grief, mutual healing, and a quiet, growing love neither of them was quite ready to name aloud, but both of them were beginning to feel deeply within their hearts. Alina woke one morning to find her bedroom transformed into something she barely recognized. Fresh flowers filled every corner, their fragrance sweet and gentle in the early light. A new wardrobe stood open near the window, filled with dresses in colors she had once admired only briefly during a conversation with Alice weeks earlier, colors she never imagined he had noticed her mentioning at all. "What is all this?" Alina asked Alice, who stood by the door with a knowing smile. "The Duke ordered it all himself, my lady. He spent nearly an entire afternoon selecting the fabrics personally," Alice said, clearly delighted by the unusual sight of her employer taking such personal interest in something beyond business matters. Alina made her way downstairs, finding Alaric already at the breakfast table, reading through papers with his usual focused expression, though he glanced up the moment she entered, something like nervous anticipation flickering across his face. "You did not have to do all that," Alina said softly, sitting across from him. "I wanted to," Alaric replied simply. "You mentioned once that you loved the color lavender, and that your family could never afford such colors growing up. I thought perhaps it was time you had everything you deserved, rather than only what was practical." The gesture, small in the grand scheme of his wealth, felt enormous to Alina, who had spent her entire life learning to want less rather than more. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion she had not expected to feel over something as simple as new dresses. From that morning forward, small gestures of unexpected tenderness became a regular part of Alina's daily life. Alaric began leaving short notes on her nightstand before leaving for work each morning, simple messages wishing her a pleasant day or mentioning something he hoped they might discuss over dinner. He instructed the kitchen staff to prepare her favorite meals more frequently, remembering details she had mentioned only once in passing conversation weeks earlier. One afternoon, Alina mentioned offhandedly to Margaret in the kitchen that she missed horseback riding, a hobby she had enjoyed as a child before her family's financial troubles forced them to sell their horses. She thought nothing more of the comment, assuming it was simply idle conversation shared between friends. 2 days later, Alaric led her outside after breakfast, guiding her toward the stables where old Mr. Foster stood waiting beside a beautiful chestnut mare, saddled and ready. "What is this?" Alina asked, stunned. "Margaret mentioned you missed riding," Alaric admitted, looking slightly uncertain, as though worried he had overstepped some invisible boundary. "I thought, if you wished, we could ride together this morning." Alina's eyes filled with unexpected tears at the thoughtfulness behind such a simple gesture. "You remembered that? I only mentioned it once." "I remember most things you say, Alina," Alaric said quietly, his voice carrying a sincerity that made her chest tighten with warmth. "I find that I pay close attention to you, more than I probably should for a man who once claimed he wanted a practical, distant marriage." Alina laughed softly, the sound light and genuine. "I am glad you broke that promise to yourself." They rode together that morning through the estate's expansive grounds, Alaric guiding her gently when her riding skills, rusty from years of disuse, needed correction. For the first time since her arrival at Stirling Manor, Alina felt truly free, laughing loudly as they raced along a grassy path, the wind whipping through her hair, Alaric's rare, genuine laughter echoing beside her. A sound so unfamiliar to the estate staff that several of them paused their work simply to listen, smiling at the unexpected joy-filling halls that had known only silence for years. As weeks passed, their bond deepened further through countless small moments that built steadily into something undeniable. Alaric began attending Alina's favorite evening activities, sitting beside her while she read in the library, occasionally sharing his own favorite passages from books he had loved during his university years studying architecture. He learned to play the piano again, an instrument he confessed he had abandoned after Nathaniel's death because his brother had loved hearing him play, and the memory had become too painful to bear alone. One evening, Alina found him seated at the piano in the long-neglected music room, playing a slow, beautiful melody she did not recognize. She stood quietly in the doorway, unwilling to interrupt, watching as his fingers moved with practiced skill across the keys, his expression peaceful in a way she had rarely witnessed. When the song ended, he noticed her standing there and offered a small, embarrassed smile. "I did not realize I still remembered how to play." "It was beautiful," Alina said, walking closer. "What was it?" "Something I wrote a long time ago before everything changed," Alaric admitted. "I never gave it a proper name." "You should name it now," Alina suggested gently. Alaric considered this for a long moment, watching her with an expression that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "I think I will call it Alina's Return," he said quietly, "because that is what it feels like, having music return to this house alongside you." Alina's breath caught at the tender simplicity of his words, and without thinking, she crossed the remaining distance between them and gently kissed his cheek, a small gesture that had grown natural between them over recent weeks, though this particular moment carried an intensity that made both of them pause, aware that their relationship had shifted into something neither of them could easily deny any longer. "Alina," Alaric said softly, his voice rough with emotion, "I find that I am falling in love with you, and I do not quite know what to do with a feeling I promised myself I would never allow again." "You do not have to know exactly what to do with it," Alina whispered, her hand resting gently against his cheek. "You only have to allow yourself to feel it, one day at a time, just as I told you before." Alaric reached up, covering her hand with his own, his eyes searching hers with a vulnerability that spoke louder than any words. "I love you, Alina Whitmore Stirling," he said finally, the confession clearly costing him tremendous courage after years of guarding his heart so fiercely. "I do not deserve someone as kind and patient as you, but I find that I cannot imagine my life without you any longer." Tears filled Alina's eyes as she smiled, her heart overflowing with an emotion she had not expected to find within a marriage that had begun as nothing more than a desperate contract. "I love you too, Alaric," she whispered. "I did not expect to, not when this all began, but somewhere between the silence and the storms, I fell in love with the man hiding behind the walls. Their first genuine kiss followed shortly after, gentle and full of quiet promise, sealing an emotional bond that had grown steadily stronger through months of patience, honesty, and mutual healing. From that evening forward, their marriage transformed entirely, no longer merely a practical arrangement between strangers, but a genuine partnership built on deep affection and shared vulnerability. Alaric's transformation did not go unnoticed by those around him. His business associates commented on his newfound warmth during meetings, noting he smiled more often and seemed genuinely engaged in conversations he once treated as mere formalities. Mrs. Bell often remarked to Alice that the entire estate felt different, lighter somehow, as though years of accumulated grief had finally begun lifting from its ancient stone walls. Alaric's affection expressed itself in increasingly generous ways as their love deepened. He surprised Alina with a private art exhibition in the Manor's gallery, commissioning local artists to display their work purely for her enjoyment after learning of her passion for painting. Something she had abandoned after her family's financial struggles made art supplies an unaffordable luxury. He arranged private cooking lessons with Margaret. When Alina expressed interest in learning traditional family recipes, she remembered fondly from her childhood before financial hardship changed everything. He also began actively supporting her independent interests, funding a small scholarship program for underprivileged children interested in the arts, something Alina had mentioned wanting to establish, but assumed would remain merely a dream given her previous financial circumstances. When she discovered the scholarship fund already established under both their names, she found Alaric in his study and embraced him tightly, overwhelmed by his generosity. "You did not have to do this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I wanted to give you the ability to help others the way you have helped me," Alaric replied simply, holding her close. "You gave me back pieces of myself I thought were lost forever, Alina. Allowing you to build something meaningful with those same resources feels like the least I could offer in return." Their relationship continued deepening through countless similar gestures over the following weeks, each act of kindness building upon the last, creating a foundation of genuine love and mutual respect that neither of them had anticipated finding within a marriage born from such difficult circumstances. Alina, once forced into this arrangement out of desperate necessity, now found herself genuinely cherishing every moment spent alongside a man the world had once dismissed as cold and unreachable. Yet even as their love blossomed steadily within the private walls of Stirling Manor, neither of them realized that outside those protective walls, old threats and jealous rivals were beginning to take notice of the Duke's remarkable transformation, threats that would soon test the strength of their newfound love in ways neither of them could have anticipated. The invitation arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, elegant and gold-embossed, announcing a grand gala hosted by the Ashford family to celebrate their company's 40th anniversary. Alina recognized the name immediately and felt a familiar unease settle into her stomach, remembering Victoria Ashford's sharp smile and pointed words from months earlier. "We do not have to attend," Alaric said gently, noticing her expression as she read the invitation over breakfast. "Charles Ashford is a business associate, but our relationship is purely professional. I can send our regrets." "No," Alina said, straightening her shoulders with newfound confidence. "We should attend. I refuse to hide from Victoria Ashford or anyone else who thinks they can intimidate me." Alaric studied her for a long moment, something like pride flickering behind his gray eyes. "You have changed so much since you first arrived here," he said softly. "That frightened young woman who signed our marriage contract with trembling hands has become someone remarkably strong." "I had a good teacher," Alina replied with a small smile, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "Watching you rebuild yourself taught me that healing and strength often grow together." The night of the gala arrived with Alina dressed in a stunning emerald gown that complemented her confidence perfectly. Alaric stood beside her, proud and attentive in ways that would have seemed impossible to imagine during the early, cold days of their marriage. As they entered the grand ballroom, heads turned immediately, whispers following their arrival, though this time the whispers carried genuine admiration rather than pity or curiosity. "Duke Sterling, Duchess Sterling, how wonderful to see you both," Charles Ashford greeted them warmly, though Alina noticed his eyes flickered briefly toward someone standing near the champagne table, someone whose presence made her stomach tighten with familiar unease. Victoria Ashford approached moments later, dressed elegantly in deep red, her smile as sharp and calculated as Alina remembered from their first meeting. "Alaric, Alina, how lovely you both look tonight," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I must say, Alina, marriage seems to suit you remarkably well. Who would have thought our Ice Duke could be tamed so thoroughly?" "Victoria," Alaric said, his tone polite but noticeably cool, a stark contrast to the warmth he showed Alina regularly now. "It has been some time." "Indeed it has," Victoria replied, her eyes lingering on Alaric with an expression that made Alina's protective instincts flare instantly. "We really must catch up properly sometime, for old time's sake." "I do not believe that will be necessary," Alaric said firmly, moving slightly closer to Alina, a small but deliberate gesture that clearly communicated his loyalty and left no room for misinterpretation. Victoria's smile faltered slightly, though she recovered quickly, turning her attention toward Alina instead. "You must be quite proud of yourself, dear, capturing such a wealthy title through your little contract marriage. Though I do wonder how long genuine affection can truly last when it began from such practical, mercenary circumstances." The insult was subtle but sharp, designed to plant doubt rather than deliver an obvious attack. Alina felt a flash of anger but forced herself to remain composed, remembering the strength she had built over recent months. "Our marriage may have begun from necessity," Alina said calmly, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. "But what we have built since then is genuine, something neither wealth nor status could ever manufacture artificially. I am sorry you seem unable to recognize authentic connection when you witness it." Victoria's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, clearly unprepared for such a composed and confident response. She excused herself shortly after, though Alina noticed her watching them from across the room throughout the remainder of the evening, calculation evident in her sharp gaze. The following weeks brought increasingly troubling developments. Rumors began circulating through social circles, subtle whispers suggesting Alina had manipulated Alaric through calculated affection, painting her as an opportunist who had cleverly exploited his emotional vulnerability following his brother's tragic death. Some rumors went further, suggesting Alina maintained secret correspondence with other suitors, hoping to secure additional financial security beyond her marriage to Alaric. Alina discovered the extent of these rumors when Alice, visibly distressed, showed her a gossip column from the local newspaper containing thinly veiled accusations against her character. "I am so sorry, my lady," Alice said, clearly upset on Alina's behalf. "I did not want you to be blindsided if someone mentioned it." Alina read through the article carefully, her hands trembling slightly with a mixture of anger and hurt. The article did not name Victoria Ashford directly, but the timing and specific details strongly suggested her involvement in spreading such damaging falsehoods. When Alaric arrived home that evening, Alina showed him the article immediately, watching his expression shift from confusion to genuine fury as he read through the fabricated accusations. "This is unacceptable," Alaric said, his voice hard with barely controlled anger. "I will address this immediately." "Wait," Alina said, placing a calming hand on his arm. "Before you react, I need to ask you something honestly. Do you believe any of this?" Alaric's expression softened immediately, his anger replaced by tender concern as he turned to face her fully. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "I know your heart, Alina. I have witnessed your genuine kindness toward everyone in this house, your authentic care for your family, and the real love we have built together. These accusations are baseless lies, likely spread by someone jealous of what we share." "Victoria," Alina said quietly, voicing the suspicion they both clearly shared. "Likely," Alaric agreed grimly. "She has always struggled to accept rejection gracefully, and my genuine happiness with you seems to have provoked her considerably. The situation escalated further the following week when Victoria appeared unannounced at Stirling Manor, requesting a private audience with Alaric regarding what she claimed was an urgent business matter. Alina, though uneasy, respected Alaric's judgment when he agreed to meet with her briefly in his study, though she made her presence known by remaining nearby, unwilling to allow Victoria any opportunity for manipulation without witness. Through the partially closed door, Alina overheard Victoria's voice shift from professional pretense to something far more personal. "Alaric, surely you see through this ridiculous charade," Victoria said, her voice taking on a pleading edge. "This marriage began as nothing more than a desperate business transaction. We both know your heart truly belongs to someone who understands your world, your status, your true nature. That girl will never fully understand the pressures and expectations of our society." "Victoria," Alaric replied, his voice cold and unwavering in a way Alina had not heard directed at anyone since their own early, distant days together. "Alina understands me more deeply than you ever attempted to during our entire history together. She has shown me more genuine kindness, patience, and love in these past months than I experienced during our entire previous relationship years ago. I suggest you leave now, and I would strongly advise you to cease spreading malicious falsehoods about my wife immediately, or I will be forced to pursue legal consequences for defamation." Victoria's voice turned sharp with poorly concealed anger. "You will regret choosing her over what we could have rebuilt together." "The only regret I carry," Alaric replied firmly, "is ever believing our relationship held any genuine value beyond social convenience. Please leave, Victoria. Do not return to this house again." Alina stepped fully into view as Victoria exited the study, her expression furious and humiliated. Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously upon seeing Alina standing there, clearly aware she had likely overheard the entire confrontation. "Enjoy your little fairy tale while it lasts, Duchess," Victoria hissed venomously before storming out of the manor entirely, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with unresolved tension. Alaric immediately crossed the distance between himself and Alina, gently cupping her face with both hands, his expression filled with tender concern. "I am sorry you had to witness that," he said softly. "I should have handled the situation differently." "You defended me perfectly," Alina said, leaning into his touch with genuine reassurance. "I have never doubted your loyalty, Alaric, not for a single moment since that night in the storm when you first opened your heart to me completely." Despite Victoria's dramatic exit, the malicious rumors continued circulating through social circles over the following weeks, growing increasingly elaborate and damaging. Alina found herself facing pointed questions and thinly veiled insults during social engagements, though she handled each situation with growing confidence and composure, refusing to allow baseless gossip to diminish the genuine happiness she had found within her marriage. Alaric, meanwhile, took decisive action beyond simply confronting Victoria personally. He arranged a private meeting with several key figures within their social circle, addressing the rumors directly and firmly, emphasizing his genuine devotion to Alina, and expressing clear disappointment in anyone willing to spread unfounded accusations against his wife's character. His public defense, combined with Alina's continued grace and composure despite the ongoing gossip, gradually shifted public opinion firmly in their favor. The turning point came during a business dinner hosted by one of Alaric's most influential associates, where Alaric stood before the assembled guests and delivered a heartfelt, unprompted speech regarding his marriage. "Many of you have known me for years, long before my brother's tragic passing changed everything about how I approached life and relationships," Alaric began, his voice steady and sincere. "I built walls around myself so thick that I convinced everyone, including myself, that I was incapable of genuine love or connection ever again. Then Alina entered my life, initially through circumstances neither of us chose freely, yet she managed to accomplish something I believed impossible. She taught me that healing is possible, that love does not diminish strength but rather enhances it, and that genuine partnership means supporting each other through both joy and hardship equally." He turned to look directly at Alina, his expression open and vulnerable in front of dozens of witnesses. I love my wife completely, without reservation or doubt. Anyone who continues spreading falsehoods about her character clearly does not understand the remarkable woman she truly is, nor do they understand the genuine transformation she has inspired within me. The room erupted into genuine applause, several guests visibly moved by his heartfelt declaration. Alina felt tears forming in her eyes as she watched her husband, once so guarded and distant, publicly and fearlessly defend their love in front of the very social circles that had once questioned its authenticity. From that evening forward, the malicious rumors gradually faded into irrelevance, replaced instead by genuine admiration for the couple's authentic love story. Victoria Ashford, humiliated by her failed manipulation attempts, withdrew from their social circles entirely, no longer posing any significant threat to their happiness. Alina and Alaric emerged from this challenging period stronger than ever, their bond fortified by shared adversity and mutual, unwavering loyalty. Yet neither of them realized that an even greater test awaited them just beyond the horizon, one that would challenge not merely their reputation, but the very foundation of everything they had worked so hard to build together. The phone call came late on a quiet Sunday evening, shattering the peaceful atmosphere Alina and Alaric had grown accustomed to enjoying together. Alina answered to find her sister Julia sobbing uncontrollably on the other end, her words tumbling out too quickly to fully understand at first. "Julia, slow down, please. What happened?" Alina asked, her heart already racing with fear. "It is Mother," Julia managed between sobs. "Her condition worsened suddenly. The doctors say she needs an emergency surgery immediately, but the specialist she requires is incredibly expensive, and Father already exhausted every resource we have. I did not know who else to call." Alina's hands trembled as she absorbed the devastating news, memories flooding back of her mother's fragile health that had partly driven her into this arranged marriage in the first place. "I will handle it, Julia. I promise. Send me the hospital details immediately." Alaric, who had been sitting nearby reading through business documents, immediately noticed Alina's distress and moved to her side without hesitation. "What has happened?" he asked gently, though his expression already carried genuine concern. "My mother needs emergency surgery," Alina explained, her voice breaking slightly. "The specialist required is extremely expensive, and my family cannot afford it even after everything." "Then we will ensure she receives the best possible care immediately," Alaric said firmly, already reaching for his phone. "Give me the hospital information. I will arrange transportation to the finest medical facility available and ensure the specialist begins treatment tonight." Alina stared at him, overwhelmed by his immediate, unwavering support. "Alaric, this will cost an enormous amount of money." "Alina," Alaric said, taking her hands gently in his own, "your family is my family now. There is no amount of money I would not spend to ensure your mother receives proper care. Please, let me help you handle this." Within hours, Alaric had arranged everything necessary, personally contacting one of the country's leading medical specialists and arranging immediate private transportation for Alina's mother to a renowned hospital, equipped with the finest surgical facilities available. He accompanied Alina personally to be with her family during this frightening ordeal, remaining steady and supportive throughout the tense hours of waiting. The surgery, though complicated and lengthy, ultimately proved successful. Alina's mother emerged from the operation stable and expected to make a full recovery, thanks entirely to the swift, generous intervention Alaric had orchestrated without hesitation. Alina's father, overwhelmed with gratitude, approached Alaric quietly in the hospital hallway once the immediate crisis had passed. "I do not know how I will ever repay you for this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have already given our family more than we could have ever hoped for when Alina first signed that contract." "You owe me nothing," Alaric replied sincerely. "Alina has given me far more than any amount of money could ever equal. Ensuring her family's well-being is simply an extension of the genuine love and commitment I hold for your daughter." Alina, overhearing this exchange, felt her heart swell with profound gratitude and love for the man she had married. A man who had transformed so completely from the cold, distant stranger she once feared into someone whose genuine devotion knew no limits when it came to protecting the people she loved most. Yet even as this crisis resolved successfully, another challenge emerged unexpectedly from within Alaric's own business affairs. A rival businessman, jealous of Sterling Enterprises' continued success and secretly allied with Victoria Ashford's lingering resentment, orchestrated an elaborate scheme designed to sabotage Alaric's reputation and financial stability simultaneously. Fabricated documents surfaced suggesting fraudulent business practices within Sterling Enterprises, threatening not only Alaric's professional reputation, but the livelihoods of hundreds of employees who depended on the company's continued success. The scandal threatened to unravel years of hard work and genuine integrity that Alaric had built his business reputation upon. Alina watched with growing concern as Alaric grew increasingly stressed navigating this sudden crisis, spending long hours consulting with lawyers and business advisors, determined to clear his name and protect his company's employees from unjust consequences. Despite the mounting pressure, Alina noticed something remarkably different about how Alaric handled this challenge compared to how he might have reacted during the earlier, more guarded days of their marriage. Rather than retreating into isolated silence as he once might have done, Alaric openly shared his concerns and frustrations with Alina each evening, allowing her genuine support and encouragement to sustain him through the difficult ordeal. "I do not know if I can prove my innocence quickly enough to prevent significant damage," Alaric admitted one evening, exhaustion evident in his voice as he sat across from Alina, papers scattered across the table between them. "You will," Alina said with unwavering confidence, reaching across to squeeze his hand supportively. "You have built your entire reputation on genuine integrity and hard work. The truth will emerge, Alaric. I believe in you completely." Her steady confidence and unwavering support provided exactly the strength Alaric needed to persevere through the challenging weeks that followed. Together, they carefully reviewed every fabricated document, identifying inconsistencies and gathering legitimate evidence to counter the false accusations. Alina even contributed valuable insight, having developed a keen understanding of Sterling Enterprises' operations through months of genuine interest and involvement in Alaric's professional life. Eventually, through diligent investigation, they uncovered undeniable proof linking the fraudulent documents directly back to the rival businessman working alongside Victoria Ashford, who had clearly sought revenge following her humiliating rejection months earlier. Alaric presented this evidence publicly, completely clearing his name and exposing the malicious scheme designed to destroy his reputation and business. The public exoneration restored Sterling Enterprises' reputation entirely, with many business associates expressing renewed admiration for Alaric's resilience and integrity throughout the challenging ordeal. Victoria Ashford and her co-conspirator faced significant legal and social consequences for their attempted sabotage, effectively ending any remaining influence they held within their shared social circles. As the dust settled from this challenging period, Alaric found Alina in their garden one peaceful evening, the same garden where their relationship had first begun deepening months earlier. He approached her quietly, his expression filled with profound gratitude and love. "I could not have overcome any of this without you standing beside me," he said softly, taking her hands gently in his own. "You have shown me time and again that genuine partnership means facing every challenge together, regardless of how difficult or frightening it may seem." "We faced it together because that is what real love means," Alina replied, smiling warmly up at him. "I promised myself when I signed that contract that I would face whatever came with strength and dignity. I never imagined that promise would lead me toward finding genuine, lasting love alongside the very man I once feared marrying." Alaric pulled her gently into his arms, holding her close beneath the soft evening light. "Alina Whitmore Sterling," he said quietly, his voice filled with profound emotion, "you have given me back everything I once believed I had lost forever. My heart, my hope, my genuine capacity for love and happiness. I promise you, from this moment forward, I will spend every remaining day of my life ensuring you feel as cherished and protected as you have made me feel throughout this remarkable journey we have shared. Alina felt tears of genuine happiness slipping down her cheeks as she embraced him fully, finally allowing herself to believe completely in the beautiful, unexpected love story that had emerged from what once began as nothing more than a desperate, forced arrangement. Their trials had tested them both individually and together, yet each challenge had only strengthened the profound bond they now shared, proving beyond any doubt that genuine love, patience, and unwavering loyalty could triumph over even the most difficult circumstances life presented before them. A full year had passed since Alina first signed the marriage contract that changed the entire course of her life, and Sterling Manor had transformed completely alongside the relationship between its two residents. What was once a silent, grief-filled mansion now echoed regularly with laughter, music, and genuine warmth that touched everyone who lived and worked within its walls. Alaric announced one bright morning that he wished to celebrate their first anniversary with something truly special, something that would honor both how far they had come together and the genuine love that now defined their marriage completely. He spent weeks planning quietly, enlisting Mrs. Bell, Alice, and Margaret to help orchestrate a surprise that would leave Alina speechless. On the morning of their anniversary, Alaric woke Alina gently, his eyes bright with an excitement she rarely witnessed from him previously. "Get dressed," he said with a playful smile. "I have something planned for us today." Alina laughed, delighted by his uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "What exactly do you have planned?" "You will see," Alaric replied mysteriously, refusing to reveal any additional details despite her gentle teasing throughout breakfast. He guided her outside afterward, where a beautifully decorated carriage waited, drawn by two elegant white horses adorned with ribbons matching Alina's favorite shade of lavender. "Alaric, this is beautiful," Alina said, genuinely touched by the thoughtful detail. "This is only the beginning," Alaric said, helping her climb aboard before joining her inside. The carriage carried them through the picturesque countryside toward the newly completed Nathaniel Sterling Community Center, which had finally opened its doors just weeks earlier after months of dedicated construction. Alina had watched the building take shape gradually, but nothing prepared her for witnessing its grand opening ceremony, filled with local families, children playing joyfully in the newly built playground, and a genuine sense of community celebration surrounding the beautiful building Alaric had designed with his own hands. "You never told me you scheduled the official celebration for today," Alina said, tears already forming as she took in the joyful scene surrounding them. "I wanted our anniversary to include something that represents everything we have built together," Alaric explained softly. "This center exists because you encouraged me to pursue my forgotten passion again. It stands as a tribute to my brother's memory, but it also stands as a testament to the love and healing you brought into my life." They spent the morning greeting local families, watching children explore the new library and art rooms funded partly through the scholarship program Alina had established months earlier. Parents approached them repeatedly, expressing heartfelt gratitude for the incredible resource now available within their community, resources that would benefit generations of children for years to come. As the celebration wound down, Alaric guided Alina toward a quiet garden area within the community center grounds, designed intentionally to mirror the garden back at Sterling Manor, where their own relationship had first begun deepening. A small plaque stood near a newly planted rose bush, reading simply, "For Nathaniel, who taught us that love and kindness matter most. For Alina, who taught his brother how to feel again." Alina's tears flowed freely as she read the heartfelt inscription, overwhelmed by the depth of meaning behind such a simple, beautiful gesture. "Alaric, this is the most thoughtful thing anyone has ever done for me," she whispered. "You deserve every bit of thoughtfulness and love I can possibly offer, Alina," Alaric replied, gently wiping away her tears. "You transformed my entire existence from cold isolation into genuine warmth and happiness." This is merely a small token of my endless gratitude and love." That evening, their celebration continued with an elegant private dinner arranged within the manor's grand ballroom, decorated beautifully with soft candlelight and countless fresh flowers. Alaric had invited Alina's entire family to join them, wanting her parents and sister to witness firsthand the genuine happiness their daughter had found within her marriage. Alina's mother, fully recovered from her surgery months earlier, embraced her daughter warmly upon arrival. "I am so proud of the strong, loving woman you have become," she said softly, "and so grateful for the man who clearly cherishes you as deeply as you deserve." Julia, now 17 and thriving in her studies toward medical school, hugged Alaric enthusiastically. "Thank you for everything you have done for our family," she said sincerely. "You have given us more than financial security. You have given Alina genuine happiness, and that means more to us than anything else ever could." Throughout dinner, laughter and warmth filled the previously silent ballroom, transforming it completely from the somber, formal space where Alina and Alaric's wedding ceremony had once taken place with such coldness and uncertainty. Now that same space echoed with genuine joy, shared stories, and heartfelt gratitude among family members who had grown to love and support one another completely. After dinner concluded, Alaric requested a private moment alone with Alina, guiding her toward the center of the dance floor as soft music began playing from hidden speakers throughout the ballroom. It was the same melody he had composed and named after her months earlier, now fully orchestrated and beautifully arranged for their anniversary celebration. "May I have this dance, Duchess Sterling?" Alaric asked with a playful, tender smile. "Always," Alina replied, stepping gracefully into his arms. They danced together slowly beneath the soft glow of countless candles, surrounded by loved ones who watched with genuine happiness at witnessing such a beautiful transformation within their relationship. As the song reached its gentle conclusion, Alaric paused, still holding Alina close, his expression growing suddenly serious and emotional. "Alina," he began softly, "when you first arrived here, forced into a marriage neither of us truly chose freely, I promised myself I would remain distant, protected from ever experiencing pain again. Yet you patiently, gently broke through every wall I built, showing me that genuine love requires vulnerability, courage, and unwavering commitment." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box that made Alina's breath catch immediately. "I know we are already legally married, bound by a contract signed under difficult circumstances. But I wish to offer you something different now, something given freely, without obligation or necessity, purely from the depths of my heart." Opening the box, he revealed a stunning ring, elegant yet understated, clearly chosen with deep thoughtfulness rather than mere extravagance. "Alina Whitmore Sterling, will you renew our vows with me, not as strangers bound by circumstance, but as two people genuinely, completely in love, choosing each other freely and joyfully for the remainder of our lives together?" Tears streamed freely down Alina's face as she nodded eagerly, her heart overflowing with genuine happiness beyond anything she had ever imagined possible when she first signed that fateful contract nearly a year earlier. "Yes, Alaric, 1,000 times yes." Their families and closest friends erupted into joyful applause as Alaric slipped the ring gently onto Alina's finger, sealing their renewed commitment with a tender, heartfelt kiss that spoke volumes about the genuine love they had built together through patience, understanding, and unwavering devotion. In the months that followed, Alina truly began living the fairy tale existence she never anticipated experiencing, cherished and spoiled genuinely by a husband who delighted in ensuring her happiness in every possible way. Alaric surprised her regularly with thoughtful gestures, from private art exhibitions showcasing her own developing artistic talents, to spontaneous trips exploring beautiful destinations she had only previously read about in books. Yet despite the wealth and luxury now surrounding her daily life, Alina remained genuinely humble and kind, continuing her charitable work within their community, mentoring young women through the scholarship program she had established, and maintaining close, loving relationships with the household staff who had become like extended family throughout her remarkable journey. Alaric, too, continued his own personal growth, embracing his renewed passion for architecture fully, designing several additional community projects throughout the region, each one dedicated subtly to his brother's memory, while simultaneously representing the genuine happiness and purpose Alina had helped him rediscover within his own life. Their love story, once whispered about skeptically throughout their social circles, eventually became celebrated widely as one of genuine transformation and enduring devotion, inspiring others who witnessed their journey to believe more deeply in the possibility of finding real love, even within the most unexpected and difficult circumstances. 1 year turned into several, and Alina and Alaric's love only continued deepening with each passing season, weathering life's inevitable challenges together with unwavering strength and commitment. Stirling Manor, once cold and silent, now echoed permanently with warmth, laughter, and genuine happiness, standing as a living testament to the remarkable power of patience, kindness, and authentic love to heal even the most deeply wounded hearts. Alina Whitmore, once a frightened young woman forced into marriage to save her family from financial ruin, had become not merely a duchess by title, but genuinely beloved and cherished by the very man everyone once believed incapable of ever loving anyone again. Together, they proved that even the coldest, most guarded hearts could be captured completely through genuine kindness, unwavering patience, and authentic love freely given and received. Their story became legend throughout their community, a beautiful reminder that circumstances beyond our control do not define our futures, but rather, it is the choices we make, the kindness we offer, and the courage we find to love genuinely despite our deepest fears, that ultimately shape the most beautiful and meaningful chapters of our lives. 3 years after their renewed vows, Stirling Manor welcomed new life into its halls when Alina gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Alaric, who had once believed himself incapable of experiencing joy so completely, wept openly the moment he held his daughter for the first time, overwhelmed by a depth of love he had never anticipated feeling. They named her Nora, a name Alina chose carefully, explaining softly that it carried echoes of Nathaniel's memory within its gentle sound. Alaric's eyes filled with fresh tears upon hearing the meaning behind the name, deeply moved that Alina continued honoring his brother's legacy, even as their family expanded into a beautiful new chapter neither of them had imagined possible during those early, painful years following Nathaniel's tragic passing. Little Nora grew quickly, inheriting her father's sharp gray eyes and her mother's warm, gentle spirit. The household staff adored her completely, and Stirling Manor, once known throughout the region for its silence and isolation, became famous instead for hosting joyful gatherings, children's laughter echoing through hallways that had remained empty and cold for far too many years. As Nora grew older, Alina made certain she understood the full story of her parents' remarkable journey, careful to share age-appropriate versions of the challenges they had overcome together. She wanted her daughter to understand that genuine love required patience, kindness, and courage, lessons Alina hoped would guide Nora throughout her own future relationships and choices. Alaric, meanwhile, found himself embracing fatherhood with the same dedication and thoughtfulness he had shown throughout his marriage to Alina. He personally designed a beautiful playroom within the manor, filled with books, art supplies, and creative spaces meant to nurture Nora's imagination freely. He often spent his evenings teaching her chess, just as he had once taught Alina, delighting in watching his daughter's mind develop with the same curiosity and intelligence her mother possessed. 2 years after Nora's birth, the family welcomed a second child, a son they named Edmund, after Alina's father, whose unwavering love and sacrifice had ultimately led Alina toward the extraordinary life she now enjoyed completely. Edmund inherited his mother's warm brown eyes and gentle laughter, quickly becoming his older sister's most devoted companion throughout their shared childhood adventures across the vast estate grounds. Watching their children grow together, Alina often reflected on how far she and Alaric had traveled since that fateful night when she signed the marriage contract with trembling hands, uncertain and fearful of the future awaiting her within Stirling Manor's imposing walls. She marveled regularly at the transformation both she and Alaric had undergone, evolving from strangers bound by desperate necessity into genuine partners whose love only continued strengthening with each passing year. The Nathaniel Sterling Community Center continued flourishing under their combined dedication, expanding several times to accommodate growing community needs. Alina took particular pride in watching several scholarship recipients graduate from prestigious universities, many returning afterward to volunteer within the very community that had once supported their educational dreams. Julia, having successfully completed medical school with Alaric's continued financial support, eventually joined the community center's medical clinic, providing accessible health care to local families who previously struggled to afford proper medical attention. Alina's parents remained close throughout these years, visiting Sterling Manor regularly to spend time with their beloved grandchildren. Alina's mother, fully recovered and thriving in good health, often remarked joyfully that she never could have imagined such a beautiful, happy ending emerging from the desperate circumstances that once threatened to destroy their entire family. Victoria Ashford, having faced significant social and legal consequences following her failed attempts to sabotage Alina and Alaric's happiness, eventually moved away from the region entirely, her attempted schemes becoming little more than a distant, unpleasant memory rarely discussed within their social circles. Occasionally, news would reach them regarding her diminished social standing elsewhere, though neither Alina nor Alaric wasted much thought or energy dwelling on her continued misfortune, choosing instead to focus entirely on the genuine happiness and abundance surrounding their own lives. As years passed, Alaric's business continued thriving under his renewed dedication and genuine passion, expanding responsibly while maintaining the ethical integrity that had always defined his professional reputation, now further enhanced by the personal happiness and stability Alina provided consistently throughout their marriage. He eventually began training Nora and Edmund gently in matters of business and philanthropy, hoping they would one day continue the family's legacy of combining genuine success with meaningful community contribution. On quiet evenings, long after the children had fallen asleep, Alina and Alaric often found themselves returning to their beloved garden, the very place where their relationship had first begun deepening years earlier. Sitting together beneath the same roses that had witnessed their earliest moments of genuine vulnerability and connection, they frequently reflected on their remarkable journey together. "Do you ever think about how different everything could have been?" Alina asked one such evening, resting her head gently against Alaric's shoulder as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. "Constantly," Alaric admitted, wrapping his arm protectively around her. "I think about how close I came to remaining forever trapped within my own grief and fear, never allowing myself the chance to experience the genuine happiness we now share so completely. I am endlessly grateful you found the courage to open your heart again," Alina said softly. "I am equally grateful you possess the patience and genuine kindness necessary to help me rediscover that courage," Alaric replied, pressing a tender kiss against her forehead. "You transformed not only my life, Alina, but the lives of everyone connected to this family and community. Your influence extends far beyond anything either of us could have imagined possible when we first signed that contract so many years ago." Their love story, which began under circumstances neither of them chose freely, ultimately blossomed into something far more beautiful and meaningful than either could have anticipated during those early, uncertain days. Through patience, genuine kindness, unwavering loyalty, and courageous vulnerability, Alina and Alaric transformed a forced arrangement into a genuine, lasting partnership built upon authentic love and mutual respect. Their children grew up witnessing firsthand the power of genuine love to heal even the deepest wounds, learning valuable lessons about patience, kindness, and courage that would guide them throughout their own future relationships and life choices. Sterling Manor, once cold and silent, remained forever transformed into a warm, joyful home filled with laughter, love, and genuine happiness for generations to come. Alina Whitmore Sterling, once a frightened young woman forced into an unwanted marriage to save her struggling family, ultimately became not only genuinely beloved and cherished by her husband, but also a source of profound inspiration throughout her entire community, proving definitively that circumstances beyond our control need not determine our ultimate happiness or destiny. Through her unwavering kindness, patience, and courage, she had captured completely the heart of a man the world once believed incapable of loving anyone again, transforming both their individual lives and their shared future into something extraordinarily beautiful, meaningful, and enduring. And so, within the walls of Stirling Manor, surrounded by roses that continued blooming faithfully each spring, their remarkable love story continued flourishing for many happy years afterward, a timeless testament to the transformative power of genuine love, patience, and unwavering devotion between two hearts once believed too broken and guarded ever to find happiness together again.